Thank you, sir. I was just at a family farm conversation that was going on as I was coming up here, so my paperwork was in a different spot. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and our committee members. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about the many priorities that we all have here today. And I know that the committee has an intense scope of work to take on, so I do appreciate this time you've allotted for us here. So I want to talk to you about a really important piece of legislation for not just myself, but for my neighboring colleagues and others around the country that have added on from the initial bill that I'd introduced with my colleague, Mr. Thompson. And it really boils down to H.R. 4970 that we're entitled the Protect Innocent Victims of Taxation After Fire Act. It's been drafted to halt the imminent taxation of disaster aid for wildfire victims and survivors, of which we've had so many cases of this in Northern California, in my district, and Mr. Thompson's district, and some of our other neighbors as well, and in the West. So we have these amazing folks that I get to represent, these resilient survivors of multiple wildfires across Northern California. From 2015 to 2018, these fires were sparked, in some cases, by electrical transmissions lines that have destroyed nearly 30,000 structures, injured hundreds of residents, and killed more than 130 of our constituents. In the aftermath, survivors received disaster assistance from FEMA. So many of you on this committee probably know under the Internal Revenue Code of IRS, Section 139, this assistance is tax-free. In fact, the tax code offers a multitude of additional forms of tax relief disaster for victims, including Section 121 for excluding property losses, Section 165 for deducting casualty losses, Section 1033 for deferring involuntary conversions, Section 213 for deducting personal medical care costs. Those are a few, but I think you can see that the current established intent of the U.S. tax policy is to exclude disaster losses from taxation. So I bring up these other sections because survivors of the fires from 2015 to 2018 I mentioned earlier were also recipients of disaster aid payments from a special settlement trust created in 2020 when the power utility who caused these wildfires ultimately went bankrupt. Now, unlike disaster aid from FEMA, payments from this settlement are interpreted by IRS to be fully taxable as income. Fire victims will be taxed on these awards they've received from the utility, is the direction things are going to go here. And on top of that, the real insult to the injury, I guess, would be despite court-approved lawyers receiving between 25 and 33% of each payment of these awards, the recipients will pay the amount on the lawyer's income on this. They will pay the full amount on the lawyer's portion of the income. Unbelievable. Can you imagine what that's like for the fire victims? So even then, the effect of this do not end at the taxation component. If the disaster aid is registered as income, survivors could also face a significant loss of federal benefits. Supplemental security income, SNAP benefits, WIC benefits could all be almost eliminated in nearly these cases if they're interpreted as that their income is too high to now receive these. Healthcare subsidies would be dramatically reduced for those on the lower income scale. And believe me, many of these folks living in this area, these fire victims, are not on the high income scale. They're in homes that they could afford to live in. They're 50 years old or 70 years old, that they're going to have a very hard time replacing, especially since many of them were underinsured for modern building costs. So veterans benefits could be, especially on co-pays for prescriptions, those could be curtailed. If there's a possibility of seeking a federal student loan, they'll have to look somewhere else. So if this disaster aid is treated as income, the federal government's entire social safety net will bail out on these survivors, again, many of them who are on the low income scale. So it's not just exclusive to Northern California with my district and my neighbors' districts there. It has happened again in both Colorado and in Oregon. Protection offered by H.R. 4970 extends guaranteed relief and ease of mind to wildfire survivors anywhere in the U.S., California, Colorado, Oregon, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Texas, and even now Hawaii. So it's a pretty simple piece of legislation. These payments, though not coming from FEMA, are disaster aid. Survivors don't have the resources to navigate our tax code. They deserve the simple, singular tax exclusion given to all other forms of disaster aid. Notably, the bill includes a no double benefit clause, which will allow survivors with the resources or knowledge necessary to use existing tax benefits to do so. Now, I do want to put a timeline on this, is that IRS did a good and a helpful thing in that many of my counties in California that have suffered disaster, they were, the people in those particular counties designated IRS delayed their filing from April 15th till October 15th this year. So there's many folks that are waiting the legislation here, hoping that this could be complete before they have to decide upon filing October 15th, are they going to have to include this benefit as income or will it be non-taxable? So if they don't include it and it ends up remaining taxable, then they're going to have penalties and interest and all that. And if they do pay it, then they'll have to wait for a possible refund of that if it turns out to be a non-taxable event. So either way, you got folks really caught in the lurch on this thing with deciding. I appreciate that IRS did indeed move that time back to October 15th. So, but we would be really, really helpful for folks to be able to have this decided by October 15th in some fashion or other. So this committee listening to this today is very important to me, very important to those constituents. And with that, I'll yield there. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're glad to have you.